Tonight we step into a world where steam curls through the cold morning air, where the damp smell of stone mingles with the faint sweetness of mulberry leaves, and where every sound feels muffled under a blanket of mist. You stand at the massive wooden gates of a Ming Dynasty silk workshop, the kind that once supplied fabric to scholars, merchants, and if you could survive the insane work schedule, imperial courts. The sky is just turning pale, a thin blue-grey ribbon over the tiled rooftops. The bells from the watchtower ring with a low, almost lazy rhythm, telling the city it's time to wake up. You probably won't survive this shift unless you've had a decent breakfast, but good news, no one here had time for that either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. I want to see where this little time machine of ours is reaching tonight. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward, and the gates creak open, letting in a draft of cool, river-scented air. The courtyard inside is still half asleep. Low-roofed storerooms line the walls, their doors barred with simple wooden beams. A narrow path of polished cobblestones leads toward the main hall, where you hear the occasional clink of a ladle against a vat. A black cat stretches itself on a warm stone slab, flicking its tail in your direction, perhaps deciding whether you're worth acknowledging. Your shoes scuff against the cobblestones, and you notice the faint glimmer of dew, each drop trembling in the pale light. To your left, a young apprentice carries a bundle of dried mulberry branches, his robe sleeves rolled so high you can see the blue veins on his forearms. "Don't dawdle," someone calls from inside, though it's not clear if they mean you or him. Historians still argue whether these early hours were chosen for practical reasons, cooler temperatures preventing premature drying, or for more ritualistic purposes, the dawn seen as a cleansing threshold between night stagnation and day's productivity. You feel it might be both. The air is crisp, carrying that new page feeling. The Ming Dynasty was nothing if not obsessed with balance between art and utility, beauty and endurance, heaven and earth. At the far end of the courtyard, you pass under a carved wooden arch, its beams painted a faded vermilion. Up close, you can see faint traces of gold leaf clinging in sheltered cracks, the rest worn away by years of mist and sun. The characters above read pure as river water, which is reassuring, until you realize you'll probably be dunking your hands into that same river in a few hours, pure or not. Inside the main hall, steam curls from giant clay vats, each one taller than your shoulder. The workers move like shadows through the haze, their movements quiet but precise. One lifts a heavy ladle, another turns a bundle of raw silk slowly in a vat of warm water. The fibers glisten faintly, like moonlight trapped under the surface. Somewhere behind you, someone coughs. The sound seems to dissolve into the vapor. You're given a quick nod by a foreman, his face half hidden under a simple cloth headscarf. He gestures toward a low bench by the side wall where you can leave your outer robe. A warm splash of liquid lands on your hand as you pass, condensation dripping from the beams above. It smells faintly sweet, like rainwater that's run through flowers. The silk here hasn't yet been washed. It's still in its raw, slightly gummy state, stiffened by the natural sericin coating the worms spun around themselves. If you run your fingertips over it, you'd feel a faint drag, almost like touching your skin after it's dried with salt water. The air around the bundles carries a mix of scents: mulberry, faint smoke from the morning fires, and the slightly nutty aroma of raw silk itself. There's a rhythm to the place. Wooden ladles dipping, water sloshing, footsteps pattering across worn stone. It's not loud, more like the background hum of a coffee shop, but with less gossip and more 15th century elbow grease. The workers don't speak much at this hour. It's too early for chatter, and besides, the morning's tasks are considered almost sacred. It's believed the first handling of the silk each day sets the tone for its entire journey, from worm to woven robe. You take a seat on a narrow stool, not too far from a bamboo screen that filters in the dawn light. Through the faint latticework shadows, you watch an older woman untangle a skein, her fingers moving with such calm precision that you can't tell if she's working or meditating. Her lips move slightly, maybe she's reciting one of the many protective verses workers used, believed to ward off snags, stains, or even bad luck in the trade. One quirky thing you learn from the apprentice beside you: the first person to drop a spool of silk in the morning has to sweep the entire courtyard after sunset. He says it with a grin that makes you think he's speaking from recent, bitter experience. The superstition isn't just about clumsiness, it's about breaking the flow of the workshop, as if that one slip could ripple out and curse an entire batch. You're drawn to the far side of the hall where the massive gates to the river path remain closed for now. In a few hours, those will swing open, and the procession will begin. Baskets of raw silk carried to the banks, weighted down, rinsed, and coaxed into the softness that emperors wore against their skin. For now, though, the world remains wrapped in morning haze. The workers shuffle quietly, the vats hiss, and you feel that peculiar mix of anticipation and dread that comes before hard, cold work. The foreman returns, holding a small copper gong. One soft chime echoes through the space, not loud, but enough to change the air somehow. A few workers glance toward the door. The day's first inspection is about to begin. And you're still trying to convince your hands they'll be warm again sometime this century. The gong's soft vibration still hangs in the air when the first bundles are brought forward for pre-wash inspection. You're nudged toward a low table polished by countless elbows, its surface strewn with coiled skeins of raw silk. The fibers look deceptively clean, pale as fresh cream, but when you lean closer, you see little flecks clinging here and there, crumbs of mulberry leaf, stray worm casings, even a few dried husks from insects that got too curious during cocoon season. The foreman gestures for you to try. You reach for a bundle, and it's heavier than you expected, dense with the silk's own natural gum. It slides slightly in your grasp, smooth yet resisting like hair after a long day without conditioner. You run the strands over your fingers the way the older women do, feeling for tiny knots, lumps, or spots where the threads have fused together. They're looking for imperfections now because once the silk hits water, anything hidden inside will either become permanent or unravel completely. And no one wants to be the one blamed for the spool that doomed a robe. A worker named Cho laughs softly as you squint at a particularly stubborn knot. Don't pull it, she warns, you'll make the spirit of the thread angry. You're not sure if she's joking, but then again, superstition seems woven into every fiber here, literally. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were just clever ways to enforce careful handling or if they reflected genuine spiritual practice. Either way, they work. You immediately stop tugging. At the next table, a younger apprentice holds a bundle up to the light filtering through the paper windows. He tilts it this way and that, checking how the fibers catch the glow. Pure silk should have a soft, even shimmer, without any dull streaks. A streak means contamination, maybe a tiny bit of twig or worm silk that didn't get reeled clean. You're told that in the Ming Dynasty, imperial inspectors could reject an entire workshop's batch for such flaws, leaving weeks of work unpaid. Every so often, you see someone pull a small pin from their sleeve, a sliver of bone or bamboo sharpened to a fine point. They use it to tease apart a snag, working with the patience of someone detangling the world's most expensive spaghetti. You try it yourself and quickly realize your fingers lack the muscle memory for such delicate persistence. By the time you've freed a single knot, Cho has finished 4. She gives you a look halfway between pity and amusement. One quirky detail you notice: beside each table, a small dish of water holds what looks like floating flower petals. When you ask, an older man tells you they're actually thin slices of radish. Apparently, if your fingers get too slick from the silk's natural oils, you rub them on the radish to restore grip. The scent is faint but crisp, like a hidden garden in the middle of this warm, steamy hall. You think about how many little tricks like this have probably been passed down word of mouth, never written in any ledger. You shift your attention to the baskets lined up near the far wall. They're woven from thick bamboo strips, sturdy enough to carry silk to the river without losing shape. A thin layer of soft cloth lines each basket to keep the fibers from catching. The baskets themselves are works of art, each one patched and repatched, its edges polished from years of use. You can almost hear the ghosts of previous batches whispering inside them. From the corner of your eye, you catch a movement, the foreman dipping his hand into a small wooden box and sprinkling something pale over the silk before bundling it again. It looks like fine powder, almost like flour. You lean closer and catch a faint scent, chalky but clean. Cho explains it's powdered rice husk, used to keep the threads from tangling too tightly during transport. Historians still argue whether this practice was purely functional or if it also symbolized feeding the silk before its purification, but no one here seems inclined to debate, they just do it because it works. Once inspected, the bundles are tied loosely with thin hemp cord, enough to keep them together but easy to undo by the riverbank. The knots are simple loops, not the kind you'd use for cargo, you can slip them apart with a single tug. You realize this is intentional, wet hands don't do well with complicated knots, and cold water has a way of making fingers stupid. There's a small commotion near the far table when one apprentice finds a cocoon remnant still lodged deep in the silk. It's barely the size of a fingernail, but it sparks murmurs. You hear someone mutter about bad luck from lazy reeling. The foreman strides over, removes the offending piece with quiet efficiency, and says nothing. But you notice the apprentice's cheeks burning red. In a place where the smallest imperfection could ruin a garment meant for a magistrate's wife, no mistake goes unnoticed. Your own bundle finally passes inspection, though you suspect Cho's discreet help had something to do with it. She gives you a quick nod toward the open courtyard beyond. The gates to the river will open soon, and the air in the room shifts, part relief, part apprehension. This inspection is only the first step, but it's the one that decides whether the silk even gets a chance at purification. As the workers gather the approved bundles into neat stacks, the foreman runs his fingers over each one like a calligrapher testing brushes. You notice his hands are rough and cracked, the skin along his thumbs shiny from years of contact with silk and water. There's no ceremony to the end of the inspection, just a quiet efficiency that comes from doing the same thing every dawn for decades. You follow the group toward the outer courtyard, where baskets now wait in ordered rows. The mist has begun to lift, revealing the faint outlines of willow trees along the distant riverbank. The air smells brighter, cleaner, as if even the day itself knows it's about to watch something important unfold. Somewhere behind you, the black cat from earlier slips between the baskets and vanishes toward the shadowed storerooms, tail curling like a question mark. The baskets of silk sit like patient travelers, each wrapped in its hemp cord, waiting for their turn in the warm embrace of the mulberry leaf infusion. You follow the group back into the main hall, where the air is already thick with fragrant steam. The vats you noticed earlier now bubble softly, their surfaces shimmering with a greenish-gold sheen. The scent is both sharp and sweet. Imagine fresh-cut grass steeped in hot tea, with just a whisper of honey lingering underneath. One of the senior workers, a wiry man named Narration, gestures for you to come closer. He dips a wide bamboo ladle into the vat and lifts it slowly, letting the pale liquid pour back in a silken ribbon. "First drink for the silk," he says, grinning. You're not sure if he's speaking metaphorically or if he genuinely imagines the fibers sipping this herbal brew, but either way, the thought is oddly charming. Historians still argue whether this infusion was primarily functional, softening the sericin to make washing easier, or if it was also part of a more ritualistic, almost medicinal process. Mulberry leaves, after all, were the silkworm's sole diet. Returning the leaves to the silk at this stage might have been seen as a form of reunion. It's almost poetic. The the thread and its source meeting again before parting forever. You're handed a bundle of inspected silk and instructed to ease it into the vat. The heat rises against your face, curling your hairline damp. As the silk slips under the surface, it moves with a languid, almost serpentine grace, its pale strands catching the light through the steam. You stir it gently with a long wooden paddle, feeling the fibers loosen and flex under the warmth. Narration explains that the leaves have been simmering since before dawn, coaxed to release their oils and subtle tannins. The workshop uses leaves harvested only from the outer branches of the trees. Apparently, they have more sunlight and develop a slightly stronger aroma. He winks and says, "It's like picking the sunniest apples," which makes you wonder how many batches were ruined before someone figured that out. On the far side of the hall, a younger apprentice is skimming stray leaves from another vat with a flat basket. He moves in circles, catching each floating scrap like a fisherman scooping minnows. Chio passes by and murmurs that leaving too many leaves in can stain the silk with greenish patches, something imperial buyers would reject without a second glance. In the Ming court, even the color white had degrees of acceptability: winter frost good, pondweed bad. You're surprised to learn that some workshops would also add a pinch of finely ground ginger root to the infusion, claiming it kept insects from nibbling on damp silk later in the process. This workshop doesn't use ginger, too expensive for bulk orders, but Narration says the tradition survives in smaller, family-run operations. It's one of those quirky details that make you realize how much the craft has been shaped by generations of trial, error, and why not try this, thinking. As you stir, the foreman walks past, trailing a faint cloud of steam behind him. He stops by each vat, dips his fingers in, and tastes the liquid. You stare in mild horror, but he shrugs. "If it's good for silk, it's good for me." You wonder how much of that is bravado and how much is a genuine belief that mulberry water might grant longevity, or at least a stomach that can handle anything. When your bundle has had its fill of warmth, you lift it slowly, letting the liquid stream off in glistening threads. The silk feels different now, softer, heavier with absorbed heat, and carrying that forest-like aroma deep into its fibers. You lay it gently onto a slatted bamboo tray, where it will rest briefly before heading toward the river. The tray itself is stained with years of use, its weave polished smooth where countless skeins have lain before. Near the door, two women are wringing out silk by hand, their fingers twisting with the same steady rhythm as water wheels. They work in near silence, the only sound the soft squish and drip of liquid hitting the clay floor. Occasionally, they exchange quick glances, tiny nods of approval if the silk passes muster, or a raised eyebrow if a thread resists. One apprentice, perhaps bored, blows across the vat's surface to make the steam swirl dramatically. Narration swats him lightly on the back of the head. "Don't play with the clouds," he says, "or the rain will find you." You file that away as another example of workshop folklore, possibly invented to keep steam out of workers' lungs. You help carry the trays to the shaded anteroom just beyond the hall, where the air is cooler. This is the staging area before the river procession begins. The bundles rest here so they won't be too hot when plunged into cold water. Shock can tighten the fibers too much, making later softening harder. It's like letting bread dough rest before baking. Even silk needs a moment to collect itself. The light in the room is dim, filtered through hanging strips of cloth that sway gently with the draft. Outside, you can hear the muffled rush of the river, promising the next stage of the ritual. The smell of mulberry still clings to your hands, earthy and green. It feels almost too alive to belong to something as delicate as silk, yet here it is, soaking into every thread. When the foreman finally signals for the gates to open, the workers begin lifting the baskets, each now carrying silk that is not just inspected but infused, prepared for the river's cleansing grip. The air sharpens as you step outside, the sunlight brighter than it was an hour ago, the mist breaking apart over the willow branches. Somewhere nearby, the black cat reappears, perching on a wall to watch the procession like a silent supervisor. The river's voice grows louder as you follow the narrow cobblestone path sloping down from the workshop's courtyard. The baskets sway gently in the workers' hands, the damp silk inside releasing a faint green sweetness into the air. You notice that each carrier moves in step with the others, not perfectly synchronized, but close enough that the procession feels intentional, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat guiding the morning. The path is shaded by tall willows, their trailing branches brushing the tops of your shoulders as you pass. Here and there, the leaves tremble, scattering droplets from last night's rain onto your sleeves. You spot the river through gaps in the foliage, a pale jade ribbon winding through the landscape, its surface catching flashes of sunlight. It looks calm from a distance, but you can already hear the quick slap of water against the pilings of the washing platform. Historians still argue whether this location, slightly upstream from the city center, was chosen for the purity of its current or for convenience to the workshop. Official records from the Ming court stressed river clarity as essential for imperial silk, but some scholars think that was just a diplomatic way of saying keep it away from the tanners and butchers. You decide you'd rather not imagine the downstream water quality. As you approach the bank, the smell changes. The earthy sweetness of the mulberry infusion fades, replaced by the sharper scent of river water, clean but tinged with silt. The air is cooler here, carrying a faint metallic tang that pricks your skin awake. A few workers kneel at the edge, leaning over to check the current. They watch for floating debris and toss aside any stray leaves or twigs that might snag the silk. One quirky detail catches your eye, a small clay figurine of a carp tucked into a niche on the platform's railing. It's about the size of your fist, with exaggerated scales and a wide, permanent grin. Chio notices you staring and explains that the carp is a sort of guardian mascot. It's said to swim ahead of the silk, ensuring a smooth journey through the water. Whether that's a genuine belief or just a cheerful superstition, you can't tell, but the figurine's shiny, worn surface makes it clear that many hands have touched it for luck. The platform itself is built low over the water, a simple arrangement of planks bound with iron nails. Its edges are worn smooth from decades of use. 2 steps lead down into the shallows, where a narrow strip of flat stones extends a little way into the current. You see how the workers use these stones to kneel or balance as they submerge the baskets. It's practical but also ritualistic. Every movement has been repeated so often it's become muscle memory. The foreman directs the carriers to space themselves along the platform. You're given a spot near the end, where the current runs a little stronger. The basket handle presses into your palm as you lower it carefully toward the water. Cold seeps through the bamboo weave, nipping at your fingers. You kneel, feeling the stone slick under your knees, and peer into the river. It's clearer than you expected. Light filters through the surface, revealing smooth pebbles below. Tiny fish dart between the shadows of the willow roots. You dip your hands into the current, and it's shockingly cold compared to the warm air. The sensation zips up your arms, making you gasp. Narration, already beside you with his own bundle, chuckles and says, "First cold bite of the day. Good for the blood." You're not convinced. Before the silk touches the water, you're instructed to swish your hands gently through the current. It's not just to clean them, it's part of the workshop's long-standing practice to greet the river, acknowledging it as a partner in the process. The motion also helps you gauge the speed of the current and decide how best to anchor the silk. You can feel the pull, steady but not violent, tugging at your wrists. Once the silk is lowered in, the transformation is immediate. The pale fibers darken under the water, clinging together in soft ribbons. The current tugs them outward, but the weight of the basket keeps everything in place. You can see bits of loosened mulberry leaf drifting away, caught in the gentle whirlpools near the stones. Chio works beside you, her movements quick and precise. She adjusts her bundle so that the water flows evenly across the threads. "The river tells you where to stand," she says, and it's true. After a few moments, you find yourself shifting slightly, aligning with the flow so the silk floats freely without twisting. You notice the quiet around you. Aside from the rush of the water and the occasional clink of bamboo against stone, there's no talking. It's not a strict rule, but workers tend to keep their voices low here, as if the river itself prefers calm. Someone once told Chiu that loud voices scatter the silk's patience. Though she admits she's never tested it, why risk angering both water and boss? At the far end of the platform, a boy is sent upstream to fill a bucket with the clearest water he can find. He returns with it balanced on a pole, dripping trails along the planks. This extra water will be poured over certain stubborn bundles to help loosen any remaining grit. It's a small but important step, one that's been passed down without much change for centuries. Your hands are numb by the time the foreman signals the first stage is done. The baskets are lifted slowly, water streaming from them in silver sheets. The silk is now heavy and pliant, its fibers having begun the long process of surrendering their stiffness. You set your basket on the platform, flexing your fingers to get the blood flowing again. The river's surface ripples in the sunlight, and you catch sight of the carp figurine's reflection glinting in the water. For a fleeting moment, you could almost believe it's swimming alongside you. Your fingertips are still tingling from the cold as the foreman gestures toward a smaller, shallower inlet just downstream. Here, the current slows enough to let fine debris drift away without sweeping the silk into chaos. This is where the first cold water plunge becomes something more deliberate, a steady, mindful coaxing of the fibers into their cleanest state. You follow Chiu down a low embankment to where flat, moss-dark stones slope into the water. The inlet is quiet compared to the main current, the surface broken only by thin ripples from the breeze. Workers kneel along the edge, their baskets resting in the shallows. They move each bundle gently through the water, never twisting, always following the flow. The rhythm is hypnotic, like a slow-motion dance you feel in your arms more than your ears. Historians still argue whether this stage was mostly about removing loose debris or if it also served as a test of fiber resilience. Some records suggest that silk intended for imperial use underwent a longer cold soak here, under the belief that the slower process yielded a smoother, more lustrous thread. Others think it was purely practical. The cold water tightened the fibers just enough to make the next soaproot stage more effective. You kneel on a half-submerged stone, easing your bundle into the water. Immediately, the silk stiffens slightly under your hands, the threads aligning as if they've been waiting for this chill. The sensation is strangely satisfying, like smoothing the wrinkles from a fine shirt fresh from the wash. The water is so clear you can watch tiny air bubbles escape from between the threads, rising to the surface like quiet laughter. Beside you, Narration hums a tune you can't quite place. It's slow, repetitive, and oddly fitting for the steady movements of dipping and lifting. He claims it helps keep his pacing even, which prevents the fibers from tangling. Whether that's a genuine technique or just his excuse to sing at work, you can't decide. A quirky moment catches your attention. One of the younger apprentices flicks a small pebble into the water just upstream. The stone's ripples spread outward, brushing the silk in soft waves. When you raise an eyebrow, Chiu grins and says, "It wakes the water." She explains that some believe still water grows lazy, and a gentle disturbance reminds it to carry away dirt. Practicality aside, you're charmed by the idea of encouraging the river like an old friend. The foreman walks the line, watching each worker closely. Occasionally, he reaches into the water to adjust a bundle's position or shake loose a clinging thread. His movements are quick but gentle, more like a gardener tending delicate shoots than a boss correcting errors. You notice how often his eyes flick toward the upstream carp figurine, almost as if he's checking whether it approves. Your hands grow accustomed to the cold, and soon you lose track of time. The water's temperature becomes a constant presence, neither shocking nor entirely comfortable, just part of the work. Your bundle begins to feel lighter as the last remnants of mulberry infusion and debris wash away. You turn it slowly, letting every strand taste the current. From further down the line, a worker lets out a muffled curse. One of his threads has snagged on a hidden splinter in the basket. Chio mutters that the river has tested his patience. Repairs will have to wait until the drying yard. Here, the priority is keeping the rest of the batch moving. You realize that even with centuries of experience, this process is never entirely free from risk. The water always has the final say. A boy with a long-handled dipper makes his way from person to person, pouring fresh upstream water over each bundle. The sunlight catches in the stream as it falls, making the silk gleam like it's catching liquid gold. It's a moment so picturesque you almost forget your knees are aching against the stone. When the foreman finally calls the end of the plunge, you lift the silk slowly, letting excess water drain away. The fibers cling together, heavier now but somehow also more supple. Droplets fall in steady trails back into the river, vanishing without a sound. You lay the bundle back in its basket and rise carefully, your legs reluctant to straighten after so long crouched. As you walk back toward the main platform, you glance over your shoulder. The inlet looks almost untouched, as if it's ready to swallow another batch without complaint. The workers ahead of you carry their baskets with the same steady rhythm as before, the procession reforming itself naturally. Somewhere nearby, a willow branch dips low enough to trail in the water, its leaves brushing the surface in an endless, silent bow. By the time you step onto the platform again, the sun has climbed higher, spilling gold across the river. The black cat from earlier is perched on a high railing, tail wrapped neatly around its paws, as if supervising your progress. You swear it blinks at you with approval, or maybe it's just waiting for someone to drop a fish snack. The baskets, now heavy with cold river water, are carried to a row of low wooden tubs set up on a platform just above the bank. From a distance, they look like oversized barrels cut in half, each one darkened by years of use and faintly fragrant from whatever was last brewed inside. This is where the silk will meet its first real lather, soaproot froth, whipped from plants that, frankly, look like nothing special until you see what they can do. A small group of workers sits cross-legged around woven trays piled high with knobby, pale brown roots. They look vaguely like misshapen carrots, except they smell earthy and a little peppery. One of the women slices the roots into thin coins, dropping them into a large stone mortar. Another pounds steadily with a long pestle, her movements hypnotic. You can hear the faint, sticky squelch as the roots break down, releasing their natural saponins. Historians still argue whether soaproot use in Ming silk workshops originated from herbal medicine traditions or from sheer accident. Maybe someone noticed how frothy the roots became when washed in water and thought, that could be useful. Either way, it became a mainstay in silk washing rituals, prized for its gentle cleaning and faintly conditioning effect on the fibers. A boy named Wen takes the pulped root and drops it into a tub already filled with warm river water. As he swishes it around with a bamboo whisk, bubbles bloom across the surface, thick, creamy, and with a faint golden tint. The smell changes too, shifting from sharp and earthy to something softer, with hints of ginger and wet leaves. The foam clings to Wen's hands like beaten egg whites, refusing to slide off until he dips them fully under. Chio hands you your bundle of silk, now freed from its basket. The foreman nods toward one of the tubs. Gently, he says, which you realize is his way of saying, if you shred this with enthusiasm, I will personally make you eat soaproot for dinner. You lower the silk into the froth, and the bubbles immediately creep up the fibers, filling every tiny gap like curious guests at a crowded party. The sensation under your hands is unlike the river's clean chill. This is soft, slippery, almost silky in itself. You press and release the bundle slowly, letting the lather work its way in. The soaproot doesn't strip the silk, it coaxes the impurities out, almost persuading rather than forcing them to leave. You think about how this might be the most luxurious bath a textile could get. On the far side of the platform, Narration flicks some of the froth toward a passing apprentice, who barely dodges in time. "Good for your skin," he says with a wink. The apprentice grumbles, but you catch him rubbing the stray foam into his hands anyway. Apparently, soaproot leaves your skin soft enough to make vanity worth a splash or two. One quirky detail emerges as you work. Occasionally, someone will dip a strip of unwashed silk into the froth, then lay it in the sun for a moment before rinsing it. Cho explains that this is a quick before and after check. If the froth is doing its job, the treated section will dry a shade brighter than the rest. It's oddly satisfying, like watching a magic trick that you know is really just chemistry. The tubs are replenished regularly, the workers whisking more soaproot pulp into the water to keep the foam fresh. There's a rhythm to it: pound, whisk, lather, rinse, repeat. Each person moves as though they've done this in their sleep. Maybe they have. You start to pick up the subtle cues. When the foam starts to sink, someone swaps in a new batch without needing to be told. The foreman makes his way along the line, dipping his fingers into each tub and rubbing them together briefly before nodding. At your station, he pauses a moment longer, his eyes flicking from your hands to the silk. You brace for criticism, but instead he gives a single, quiet good, and moves on. You decide that in this workshop, such praise is worth more than a feast. When the washing is complete, the silk is lifted from the froth and squeezed gently, not wrung, never twisted, as that would warp the fibers. The lather runs down in pale ribbons, splattering softly against the planks. The threads now feel lighter again, the sticky sericin reduced, replaced by a faint, slippery softness. You realize your hands smell faintly of soaproot, a scent you can't decide is comforting or slightly odd. The bundles are laid on bamboo mats to drain briefly, their pale strands gleaming in the sunlight filtering through the willow branches. The foam clings stubbornly to some sections, which Cho says is a good sign. It means the fibers have absorbed the cleansing agents fully. "Like a sponge remembering the ocean," she says, and you make a mental note to borrow that line someday. As you help carry the drained silk toward the next stage, you glance back at the tubs. The foam has begun to collapse into shimmering puddles, the bubbles catching light before bursting. It feels a little like leaving a warm bath for a cold room. You know the silk will face more rigorous handling soon, but for now, it's as refreshed as it's been since the worm spun it. The air shifts as you move away from the soaproot tubs, carrying the damp, fragrant silk toward a quieter section of the platform. Here, low wooden frames rise over the water's edge, each fitted with a series of smooth river stones carefully selected for their shape and weight. This is the weighted stone press, a method as old as the river itself, where patience does the work that no amount of scrubbing could. The stones are warm from the morning sun, their surfaces mottled with streaks of grey and brown. Some are perfectly flat, others gently rounded, but all have been polished smooth by years of water and silk passing over them. Narration lifts one easily, though you can see the strain in his arms, and places it atop a neatly folded bundle of silk resting on a shallow submerged platform. As the weight settles, water seeps out in a slow, steady stream, carrying with it bits of loosened grit invisible to the eye. Historians still argue whether this practice began purely as a cleaning technique or if it had symbolic roots in the idea of pressing away impurities from both material and spirit. Some scholars point to parallels in Ming-era tea preparation, where leaves were sometimes weighted under water to mellow their flavor, suggesting a cultural appreciation for slowness and subtle transformation. You kneel beside Chiu as she guides you through the process. The silk must be folded in a precise pattern before the stone is placed, layers overlapping in such a way that water can flow between them without tangling the threads. The folds are loose, almost lazy, but with an underlying order, like a carefully unmade bed. You mimic her movements, tucking each edge in place until the bundle sits ready. The stone she selects for you is smaller than the others, your training weight, she calls it. When you lower it onto the silk, it doesn't slam down but settles with a satisfying, muted thunk. Beneath the water, the silk shifts slightly, adjusting to its new burden. You watch tiny clouds of sediment bloom and drift away with the current, disappearing into the river's slow pulse. Nearby, Wen is humming a tune, perhaps to pass the time while the stones do their work. He taps one rhythmically with the heel of his palm, making a low, hollow sound. Chiu raises an eyebrow. You keep knocking like that and the river spirits will think you're asking for a storm. Wen grins but stops tapping. It's hard to tell whether the superstition is serious or just a convenient way to keep people from messing with the setup. A quirky tradition unfolds at the far end of the platform. Once a week, the oldest worker chooses a new guardian stone from the riverbank. The chosen rock is washed, polished with sand, and given a spot of honor among the others. Today isn't that day, but you see last month's selection, a pale, egg-shaped stone with a dark line running through its center, resting on a bundle like a quiet overseer. The foreman makes his rounds, timing each press by feel rather than by clock. He lifts a stone here, shifts another there, occasionally refolding a bundle before replacing the weight. You realize how much of this process is guided by touch and instinct. There's no written formula for how long a press should last. It depends on the water's temperature, the silk's thickness, even the day's humidity. As the minutes pass, the sun warms your shoulders, and the rhythmic drip of water becomes almost meditative. You find yourself focusing on small details, the way a bubble clings stubbornly to the underside of the stone before finally breaking free, the faint, greenish shimmer of the silk just beneath the surface. It's the kind of work that invites stillness, not just in the hands but in the mind. When your bundle's turn is over, you lift the stone carefully, letting the weight roll onto the platform rather than dropping it. The silk beneath feels lighter, almost airy, as if it's exhaled a long-held breath. You unfold it slowly, watching the layers loosen under your fingers. The fibers gleam faintly in the sunlight, cleaner now, their surface free of the stubborn particles that clung even after the soaproot wash. Chiu inspects your work with a critical eye, then gives a small nod. "Not bad," she says. Coming from her, it might as well be a standing ovation. You drape the silk gently over a bamboo pole, ready to carry it toward the sunbleach frames. As you glance back, you see the stones resting like a row of patient sentinels, each guarding a folded bundle beneath the water. The slow press continues for others, the river's current carrying away the last traces of the morning's labor. Somewhere, out of sight, the black cat leaps from railing to railing, its shadow sliding over the platform as if even it understands the need to move lightly here. The path from the river's edge to the sun-bleaching grounds is a short one, but you can feel the shift in temperature the moment you step away from the water. The air is drier here, scented faintly with warm dust and the faint resin of the bamboo frames. Spread across an open courtyard, these frames stand like enormous looms stripped bare, their pale surfaces reflecting the morning light so strongly you have to squint. A group of workers is already busy stretching the freshly pressed silk across them. The frames are rectangular, taller than a man, with crossbars that allow the fabric to be pinned taut. The silk, still damp from the stone press, clings for a moment before surrendering to the pull of the cloth pegs. Each worker moves with the care of someone handling a sleeping infant. They tug just enough to smooth wrinkles but never enough to distort the weave. Historians still argue whether sun-bleaching in the Ming era was purely practical or partly ceremonial. The practical side is obvious. Sunlight, especially in the dry heat of a midsummer courtyard, whitens the fibers naturally and helps them dry evenly. The more symbolic interpretation claims that letting the silk drink the sun imbued it with vitality and prestige, a visible link between the fabric and the heavens. Given how reverently some workers handle the frames, you suspect there's truth in both. Chiu hands you a section to stretch, and the moment you touch it, you feel how smooth and cool it is, like river water made tangible. The dampness seeps into your fingertips as you align it along the bamboo. The pegs are small, wedge-shaped pieces of carved wood that pinch the fabric without leaving marks. You press one in place and feel the silk resist slightly, as if reluctant to be pulled from its folded rest. In the center of the courtyard, Narration stands with a long-handled brush, lightly sweeping any stray dust or insects from the drying cloths. "It's the little things," he says without looking at you. "Dust today means flaws tomorrow." His brush is made from bundled reeds, the tips worn soft from years of work. You imagine there's probably more silk dust embedded in that brush than in an entire storage room. The sunlight grows stronger as the hours pass, and you watch the silk change under its influence. What started as a pearly cream deepens toward a brighter white, the shift so gradual you almost doubt it until you compare the edges still in shadow. There's a whispery sound when the wind brushes across the taut cloth, like a secret passing from one frame to another. One quirky practice catches your attention. In one corner of the courtyard, two workers have angled their frames slightly, so the silk catches the sun at a slant. Cho notices your glance and explains, "That's for the imperial commissions." They swear the diagonal light makes the sheen richer. Whether this is true science or superstition is unclear, but the silk on those frames does seem to glow more than the others, like it's hoarding some extra piece of daylight. The heat is relentless, and the workers take turns retreating to the shade for sips of barley tea. When your own turn comes, you notice how even in the shade, the light bouncing off the frames makes the courtyard feel like the inside of a lantern. You're grateful for the tea's roasted, slightly nutty flavor, the coolness sinking through your chest. Returning to the work, you run your hands lightly over the cloth to check for tension. Any sag in the fabric means uneven drying, which can dull the surface or cause ripples. You catch a small slack area near the bottom corner of your frame and adjust the peg until it's firm again. The change is subtle, but in this workshop, subtlety is everything. By late afternoon, the silk is almost dry, its surface cool to the touch despite the heat. The fibers feel lighter, the weave crisper under your fingertips. Cho shows you how to judge readiness. Press the edge lightly between your fingers and listen. If it makes a faint crackle, like a whisper of paper, it's ready. You try it, and sure enough, the sound is there, soft but distinct. As the sun begins its slow descent, the courtyard takes on a different quality. The shadows stretch, the light turns golden, and the silk glows as if lit from within. Workers move more slowly now, not from fatigue but from a kind of quiet satisfaction. The day's bleaching is nearly done, and the fabric is one step closer to becoming whatever it's destined for: a robe, a scroll backing, maybe even a banner to flutter in some distant wind. You help unpin the silk, folding it in wide, loose layers to keep the sheen unbroken. The warmth lingers in the fibers, a kind of bottled sunshine that you can feel against your palms. As you carry it toward the next station, you glance back at the now empty frames, their bamboo edges catching the last light like the ribs of a sleeping dragon. By the time you've carried the sun-bleached bundles into the covered workroom, the light outside has shifted into that deep honey color that tells you night is not far off. But instead of stowing the silk for tomorrow, Cho tells you to follow her. "We're not done," she says with a faint smile. "Tonight's the moon rinse." You trail her through the back gate, down a narrow path lined with wild bamboo. The river's sound grows louder, but when you reach the bank, it's different, softer, more deliberate. Lanterns float here, tethered to posts that stand in the shallows. Their flames are shielded behind oiled paper, casting pale, golden circles on the water's surface. Beyond the lantern light, the moon hovers low, wide and milky, throwing a silver path across the current. Historians still argue whether this lunar softness idea was invented as marketing for elite clients or if artisans genuinely believed moonlight altered the fiber. The practice is well documented in Ming-era diaries, though, with some entries claiming moon-rinsed silk felt cooler to the skin in summer. You can't help but imagine the emperor himself running his hand along a robe, nodding at the invisible work of the night sky. The workshop crew moves quietly, their chatter replaced by a kind of reverent stillness. When dips the first bundle into the water, the fabric sinking like a ghost into the river's silvered skin. You kneel at the edge with Chiu, who hands you a folded length to submerge. The water is cool, cooler than in the morning, and it slips through the silk without resistance, the fibers loosening as if sighing. There's a quirky superstition tied to this step. The first person to lift the silk from the moon rinse is said to absorb a little of the moon's blessing. As the newcomer, you're offered the honor. When you pull the cloth up, it streams water in slow, gleaming ribbons, catching the lantern glow in one moment and the moon's reflection in the next. Overhead, a night heron calls from the far bank, its voice a short, sharp note that seems to puncture the quiet. No one comments. In fact, you notice that during this ritual, even small sounds, the splash of silk, the creak of bamboo poles, are left unremarked, as though speech might break some fragile link between earth, water, and sky. Each bundle is handled the same way, submerged slowly, allowed to drift a little in the current, then lifted and folded in the moonlight. The whole process takes longer than the day's washing, partly because there's no rush. This is the silk's time to rest, Narration murmurs when you glance at him questioningly. You don't know if he means the fibers or the people, but it fits. The moon itself seems complicit in the work, sliding higher but not too quickly, as though lingering to watch. Its light catches in the ripples, creating an illusion that the river is laced with silver threads of its own. When your arms begin to tire, you take a seat on the low wooden platform and just watch. The lanterns sway gently, their reflections trembling on the surface. You can smell the faint tang of wet bamboo poles mixed with the cooler scent of the river at night. Somewhere upstream, a frog croaks twice, then falls silent, as if even it remembers the rules here. Chiu explains in a low voice that the moon rinse is also practical in one overlooked way. Rinsing at night prevents the hot midday sun from causing uneven evaporation, which can leave streaks in the sheen. The temperature drop also tightens the weave slightly, locking in the luster gained during bleaching. Whether or not the moon's blessing is real, you can see the logic. Still, there's a softness to the silk afterward that you can't quite explain. It feels more fluid in your hands, almost slippery in its smoothness, as if the fibers have taken on some secret property from their lunar bath. When the last bundle is finished, the workers hang the dripping lengths over a line strung between two posts, just high enough to let them sway freely. In the dim light, they look like pale banners waiting for a silent procession to begin. The current murmurs below, carrying away the day's dust and leaving only this cool, quiet brightness behind. Chiu picks up one of the lanterns, motioning for you to follow her back toward the workshop. You glance over your shoulder once more and catch the moon framed perfectly between the two posts, its reflection stretching unbroken toward the far shore. It's a sight you're fairly sure you'll remember even after the smell of river water has faded from your hands. The moon-rinsed silk is still damp as you help carry it into the courtyard again, but instead of hanging it to dry, Chiu directs you toward a set of wide, shallow tubs. Steam curls lazily from them, carrying a scent so heady it feels like you've stepped into an herbal apothecary at closing time, sweet, floral, and just a touch medicinal. Inside the tubs, petals float in clusters, golden osmanthus blossoms, pale chrysanthemum, and just barely slivers of fragrant sandalwood. A thin layer of oil from the petals glistens on the surface, catching the lamplight. The fragrance isn't just for show, Chiu says as she stirs the petals with a long bamboo rod. The oils coat the fibers, help repel moisture and moths. And, she adds with a grin, it makes the merchant's wife sigh when she opens the shipment. Historians still argue whether the practice originated during the Ming or was borrowed from even older Song Dynasty cosmetic fabric treatments. Some records mention perfumed silk being gifted to imperial concubines centuries earlier, while other scholars think the addition of herbs began as a purely practical insect deterrent before evolving into an aesthetic flourish. Whatever the origin, the workshop treats this step as both a science and an art. You kneel beside the first tub and lower a folded length of silk into the herbal bath. The petals drift aside like lazy fish, then cling faintly to the fabric before sliding away. The warm water is thickened slightly by the plant oils, and you can feel that faint slip against your skin as you guide the cloth through. Each pass of the silk stirs the blossoms into a slow spiral, releasing more scent. There's a quirky local belief that the choice of herbs can influence the wearer's mood: osmanthus for joy, chrysanthemum for longevity, sandalwood for calm. One claims that the right combination can make a miser generous, though you suspect he's testing your gullibility. You half-jokingly ask if there's a blend for guaranteed nap time and earn a quiet laugh from Chio. The rinsing is slow and deliberate. You're told to keep the silk moving so the oils coat every strand evenly. If left still, the petals can stain or leave uneven scent patches, which merchants frown upon. It's a strange kind of concentration: gentle hands, slow breathing, and a steady rhythm in the water. The motion is hypnotic enough that you almost miss the faint sound of the courtyard gate creaking open. An elderly woman enters, carrying a small clay jar. She's greeted with murmured respect and sets the jar beside one of the tubs. When she opens it, the sharp, resinous scent of pine fills the air. "Special order," she says softly. Chio explains that a noble family has requested their silk be finished with a touch of pine essence, a rare and expensive choice. "They believe it keeps the fabric awake longer," she says, shaking her head at the eccentricity. You watch as a spoonful of the pine-infused oil is swirled into the water, the clear surface now patterned with tiny refracting circles. When the silk passes through, it catches just a hint of that sharper scent beneath the florals, like a hidden note in a song. One by one, the bundles are treated, lifted, and gently wrung, not twisted, but pressed between the hands so as not to crush the fibers. As you handle the fabric, it's impossible not to notice how much heavier it feels when wet with oil-rich water, and how much more supple it becomes. The surface is slicker, but without losing the fine grain of the weave beneath your fingers. By the time the last piece is rinsed, the tubs are a swirl of floating petals and faintly golden water. The fragrance hangs thick in the air, settling into your hair, your sleeves, even the wooden walls. You suspect you'll be smelling this blend for days. The silk is carried to the next station without delay. The air is cooler now, and too much time in damp bundles would risk mildew. But as you follow, you catch sight of the tubs again, their petals slowly drifting into stillness. It's a small, quiet beauty, one you're glad you noticed before the petals are inevitably swept away at dawn. You settle onto the smooth wooden floor, legs folding beneath you in the same cross-legged position as the others. The air here is warm and still, scented faintly with the osmanthus and chrysanthemum oils from the rinse you've just finished. Before you is a low bench scattered with tools that seem almost too delicate to be useful: fine combs carved from bone, their teeth thin as hairs, each one gleaming with a faint polish from years of use. Narration hands you a length of silk. It's dry enough now to be soft rather than damp, but he warns you to handle it lightly. "Every thread has its own mind," he says. "Your job is to persuade, not to force." You place the edge between your fingers and feel the way the fibers cling together, invisible tangles hidden in the apparent smoothness. Historians still argue whether this meticulous combing originated for purely functional reasons, preparing silk for the tight, even weaving demanded by Ming court garments, or whether it began as an almost meditative artisan ritual. The earliest workshop manuals don't agree, and some scholars think it may have been both, necessity refined into tradition. Your comb's teeth slide gently between the threads, coaxing apart any places where they've clung together during washing. Every so often you catch a faint snag, a microscopic knot of filament, and work it free. The sound is soft, almost like brushing hair, and there's something oddly soothing about it. You find your shoulders loosening, your movements slowing into an easy rhythm. A quirky superstition surfaces during this process too. The first tangle combed free from each day's batch is supposed to predict tomorrow's weather. If it pulls loose easily, expect calm skies. If it fights you, rain is on the way. When watches you wrestle with a stubborn knot and smirks. Better keep your shoes by the door, he says. The workshop is quiet but not silent. You hear the faint rasp of comb teeth against silk from every direction, an overlapping hush that feels almost like a shared breath. Occasionally someone pauses to dip a comb in a shallow basin of warm water, loosening any oil buildup before continuing. You do the same, watching the tiny ripples spread across the surface. At one point, Cho leans over to show you a technique, holding the silk taut at a slight angle so the comb glides more easily. It's faster, but don't tell Narration, she whispers. You almost laugh, but the serenity of the room makes it feel like a library where even a chuckle would echo too loudly. Thread by thread, the fabric transforms beneath your hands. It becomes not just smooth, but something more cohesive, as if every strand now understands its place. You realize how impossible this step would be to rush. Machines might match the speed, but never the patient eyes and fingertips that find and fix what they cannot see. After what feels like an hour but might be less, your length is finished. You lay it across a low frame where it waits with the others, draping in folds so fluid they seem to pour rather than hang. There's no applause, no ceremony, just a shared satisfaction that's as much in the quiet nods exchanged as in the silk itself. As you reach for the next bundle, you think back to the first time you touched raw silk in the courtyard, slightly rough, uneven, alive with tiny imperfections. Now it's been scoured by river water, bathed in moonlight, perfumed with flowers, and combed until each filament is free and flawless. It's easy to forget how far the journey has already brought it, and yet there's still more ahead before it's truly finished. Narration finally rises, stretching with the slow satisfaction of a man who's done this every night for decades. He surveys the neat stacks of combed silk, his expression somewhere between pride and quiet relief. Good, he says simply, which you suspect is the workshop's highest praise. You flex your fingers, feeling the faint residue of oil and the memory of smooth threads sliding past your skin. It's a strange combination of tired and calm, as though the combing has ironed out not just the silk's tangles, but your own. The courtyard you return to now is nothing like the bustling square it was at dawn. The air is cool, carrying a trace of wood smoke from a nearby brazier. Above, the sky is a stretch of deep indigo with only the faintest scattering of stars, blurred by a thin haze. You step carefully, your eyes need a moment to adjust, and then you see them. Rows upon rows of silk lengths hang from horizontal poles, suspended between the courtyard walls like silent banners. In the dim light, they don't glow the way they did in the sun. Instead, they appear ghost-like, shifting gently whenever the night breeze drifts through. The motion is so slow and even, it feels less like the wind is moving them and more like they're breathing. The scent here is subtle but layered, the cool mineral tang of night air, the lingering osmanthus and chrysanthemum oils, and underneath it all, the faint sweetness of mulberry. You reach out to touch one length, careful not to snag it. The fabric feels cooler than the air around it, as though it's holding onto the river's memory. Historians still argue whether night air drying was a deliberate Ming innovation or simply a practical necessity in humid climates. Some claim the slower evaporation at night produced a softer, more pliable final texture, while others think it was merely a way to free up the daytime hours for other tasks. Either way, the workshop treats it like a sacred process, no loud voices, no clanging tools, just the quiet company of those who keep watch. A worker named Mai hands you a bamboo pole and points toward a half-filled section of the courtyard. Your job is to hang the freshly combed silk, spacing it evenly so the airflow touches every inch. It's a surprisingly precise task, too close, and moisture lingers too far, and space is wasted. She moves with practiced ease, and you find yourself copying her rhythm: lift, drape, smooth, step. At one point, Wen appears carrying a tray with small ceramic cups. He offers you one, the steam rising faintly in the cool air. "Mulberry leaf tea," he says. "Keeps you awake just long enough." You take a sip. It's mild, a little grassy, with a faint sweetness that reminds you of the leaves you saw steeping earlier in the vats. You joke that it probably has the same insect-repelling properties as the herb rinse, and he grins. Drink enough and no moth will dare land on you. A quirky superstition among the workers says that if you stand in the middle of the courtyard at exactly midnight and listen closely, you can hear the silk singing as it tightens in the cooling air. My swears it's true, but when you pause to listen, all you catch is the faint creak of the poles and the whisper of fabric shifting. Still, it's the kind of claim you want to believe. It fits too perfectly with the quiet magic of the place. The courtyard walls keep out most of the night's chill, but every now and then a stronger breeze sweeps through, making the silk sway more noticeably. The sound is subtle, like the rustle of paper lanterns. You realize that each length moves differently, some heavier with oil, some lighter from longer bleaching, so the hanging display is never quite symmetrical. It's strangely beautiful, in a slightly imperfect way. Hours seem to stretch here. There's no clock, just the slow changing of the light, the cooling of the tea, and the gradual drying of the fabric. You become aware of your own breathing syncing with the rhythm of the silk's motion. Occasionally someone steps forward to test a length, brushing fingers along it to gauge its dryness. A nod means it's ready to be taken inside, a small shake of the head means it will hang until dawn. When you finally help carry a dry length back indoors, you notice how it no longer clings damply to your hands. Instead, it's lighter, almost airy, yet still carries the subtle fragrance of its earlier baths. There's a finality to this step. You can feel the silk becoming something closer to its destined form. You glance back at the courtyard one more time before stepping through the door. The hanging silks seem to watch you in return, their gentle sway almost like a farewell gesture. You're back in the main hall now, but it feels transformed. The usual tools and drying racks have been pushed aside, leaving the polished floor open. In the center sits a low lacquered table, its surface gleaming under the warm lantern light. On it rests a single folded length of the workshop's finest silk, pure white, perfectly smooth, glowing faintly as if it's caught and holding the light itself. Around the table stand the senior artisans. They've changed into clean robes, some embroidered with the workshop's crest, a stylized mulberry branch in gold thread. You notice Wen, now serious, holding a narrow strip of red paper, and Narration with a small ceramic cup filled with clear liquid. The air is thick with the scent of sandalwood from an incense stick burning in a bronze holder. You're told to kneel alongside the others. The mood is formal but not stiff, more like a family gathering for a deeply respected tradition. Historians still argue whether this so-called quality oath originated from guild regulations, religious blessings, or a clever bit of marketing for noble clients. Whatever its origin, the ceremony has survived centuries mostly unchanged. Narration begins with a short speech in a slow, rhythmic tone, recounting the silk's journey, from worm to cocoon, from mulberry grove to riverbank, from moonlit rinse to the courtyard's breath. His voice is low but steady, each word sinking into the quiet like drops of ink into water. When he's finished, Wen steps forward and carefully unfolds the silk. It cascades over the table like liquid snow, not a single wrinkle marring its surface. The sight is almost hypnotic. You can't help thinking this could be the moment someone tries to sell it to a Ming princess for the price of a small house. A quirky detail you learn: the foreman's cup isn't wine or tea, it's river water collected from the same stretch used in the washing ritual. He dips his fingers into it and flicks 3 drops onto the silk, each drop leaving a temporary dark mark that disappears as the fibers drink it in. It's both blessing and final test. If the silk absorbs evenly, it's considered true. Then comes the oath itself. Narration places one hand on the silk and the other over his heart, reciting the promise to deliver only fabric worthy of the workshop's name. One by one, the senior artisans do the same. Finally, they motion for you to step forward. You hesitate, but when grins and nods, it's not just for show. You place your palm lightly on the fabric. It's cool, smooth, and strangely alive beneath your skin. You murmur the words as best you can, your voice joining the others. The moment is punctuated by the soft clang of a small handbell, and then the atmosphere shifts. Laughter and chatter bubble up, tension dissolving as if someone untied an invisible knot. Tea and sweet pastries appear from somewhere, and people start talking about tomorrow's batches, or teasing each other about who tangled the most threads during combing. You linger a little, sipping your tea. It's comforting, floral, and slightly earthy, fitting for the day's end. You can feel the silk oath still humming faintly in your mind, like you've joined a quiet, ancient club whose membership comes not from signing a form but from sharing a craft. As the last bit of incense curls upward and fades, the silk is folded again, ready to be recorded and sealed. The ceremony may be over, but the care it represents will follow this fabric wherever it goes. The next morning's light hasn't even cleared the eastern wall before you're ushered into a smaller side room you haven't seen before. It's quieter here than in the main hall, the air tinged with the faint bite of old ink and cedarwood. Against one wall sits a long, low table with a lacquered surface so smooth it reflects the lantern flames like still water. Atop it rest neat stacks of folded silk, each bundle wrapped in thin mulberry paper and tied with twine. Wen is here, along with an elderly clerk whose fingers are stained an inky blue-black. His movements are unhurried but exact, like each step is part of a ritual. A pot of ink sits ready, its surface glistening, and beside it is a bamboo brush whose tip has been trimmed to a fine, perfect point. Your job, Wen explains, is simple. Assist the clerk in preparing the official records and sealing each piece. But as soon as you start watching the process, you realize simple isn't the right word. The clerk begins by unwrapping a length of silk, inspecting it in the slanted morning light. He runs his fingertips over it, searching for even the faintest imperfection. If it passes, he nods once, and you carefully rewrap it, aligning the edges of the paper so that the bundle is perfectly square. Historians still argue whether these record books, thick, hand-bound volumes filled with brush calligraphy, were more about quality control or imperial taxation. Some suggest the Ming court demanded meticulous documentation to prevent fraud. Others think the guilds themselves kept such detail as a point of pride. Either way, the pages are gorgeous, each line of ink flowing like miniature rivers across creamy paper. Once the entry is made detailing the silk size, dye stage, and the mark of the artisan responsible, the bundle is tied and brought to the sealing table. Here's where the process turns from administrative to almost theatrical. A small pot of cinnabar paste sits open, bright red against the dark wood. The clerk presses the carved workshop seal into it, then onto the paper, leaving behind a perfect stamp, the mulberry branch crest you saw in the quality oath, encircled by tiny characters. Wen leans in to whisper, that stamp is older than Narration. Legend says it was carved by the workshop's founder using a splinter from the first mulberry tree he ever planted. Whether or not that's true, the seal has the kind of worn edges that come only from centuries of use. A quirky superstition also rides along here. The final press of the seal is done in one breath. If the stamper exhales too soon or inhales midway, it's said to pull the luck out of the fabric. You watch the clerk hold his breath with surprising poise, the red mark landing clean and strong every time. You take a turn at the wrapping table, hands moving slowly to avoid creasing the silk. The paper rustles softly, the twine gives a dry, faint snap as you tighten it, and each finished bundle stacks neatly in a growing column. Every so often, when records the tally on a hanging board, his brush strokes quick but graceful. The room stays calm, the work hypnotic. You realize that this stage, more than any of the washing or drying, feels like the true point of no return. Once sealed, the silk is officially part of the workshop's legacy. It's no longer just fabric, it's a piece of history bound for an unknown but important fate. By the time the morning sun has climbed high enough to spill a golden stripe across the table, the day's finished silk is stacked, stamped, and ready for delivery. The clerk closes the record book with a satisfying thump, the ink already drying into deep black strokes. He gives you a nod, not overly warm, but with the quiet acknowledgement of someone who's seen many newcomers and knows which ones will remember the work. You step outside into the courtyard, blinking in the sudden brightness, your fingers still faintly dusted with cinnabar and the scent of ink lingering like a shadow. The delivery courtyard hums with a different kind of energy, less craft, more movement. 2 covered carts wait by the outer gate, their wooden wheels braced with fresh rope for the journey ahead. The air smells faintly of horse sweat and oiled leather, a sharp contrast to the jasmine and osmanthus perfumes of the washing rooms. When waves you over, balancing one of the sealed bundles from yesterday against his hip. "These are going upriver," he says. "Imperial order." The words carry a casual tone, but you can hear the weight behind them. These silks will likely line the robes of high officials or be sent as diplomatic gifts far beyond Ming borders. Historians still argue whether river transport was truly safer than overland routes for such precious goods. Some point to fewer opportunities for bandits, others note that flooding and storms could destroy a shipment in hours. Either way, the workshop treats departure day as both celebration and risk, an ending and a leap of faith. You're put to work forming a chain with the others, passing bundles from the storage room to the cart. Each one is handled with the same care you've seen all along, no tossing, no shortcuts. The paper-wrapped packages slide into the carts like precious scrolls, each resting against the next in a precise arrangement. A quirky little practice happens before the carts roll, when sprinkles a handful of dried mulberry leaves inside, to remind the silk of home, he jokes. Narration, standing nearby, nods seriously as if the silk truly might forget. The drivers, both wearing wide straw hats, check their ropes twice, then climb into their seats. One has a small drum hanging from the cart's side, when tells you it's for signaling as they pass through narrow streets. You picture the steady thunk-thunk-thunk echoing off stone walls as the silk makes its way out into the wider world. When everything's ready, the courtyard gathers near the gate. No speeches this time, just a few claps on shoulders, quick murmurs of safe travel, and one last check of the seals. The gates swing open with a creak, and the carts roll forward, the sound of their wheels fading into the noise of the city beyond. The moment they disappear from sight, the energy in the courtyard shifts again. There's still work to do, always another cocoon, another washing, another midnight breeze, but for a few breaths, everyone just stands there, basking in the satisfaction of a cycle completed. You realize you've seen the whole journey, from Mulberry Grove to Riverbank, from frothy rinse to imperial departure. You also realize you'll probably never touch silk the same way again. Every fold, every shimmer will remind you of these quiet rituals and the people who keep them alive. The workers start to drift back to their stations, and Wen gives you a half smile. "Same time tomorrow?" he asks, knowing you're already hooked. You nod, even though you also know you'll carry this night and its soft, ghost-like silks into your dreams. And speaking of dreams, the air softens around you now, as though the courtyard walls have shifted into distant hills. Lantern light becomes moonlight, and the faint rustle of drying silk turns into the slow, rhythmic breath of night. Each sound stretches, each shadow drapes itself a little longer across the stones. You let your own breathing match that rhythm, slow and even, until it's impossible to tell whether you're watching the silk or the silk is watching you. The warmth of the tea you sipped earlier seems to return, pooling in your chest, flowing to your fingertips. It carries the scent of the river, the memory of the mulberry grove, and the almost whisper of the courtyard breeze. The longer you linger in that warmth, the lighter your body feels, as though the silk's softness has worked its way into your bones. Voices fade into a background hum, neither near nor far, like the sound of a fan on a summer night. The courtyard drifts further away, and yet somehow you're still in it, wrapped in the faint sway of those pale lengths moving in the dark. Your eyes close without effort, the fabric folding over the edges of your thoughts until everything is smooth, seamless, and still. Sweet dreams.